All right, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're in the shop, talking shop about the 2025 Sherco model line. Now, I just returned home from France for the global launch of the 2025 Sherco model range. And before we dive into this video, I just want to remind you guys that a ton of our YouTube viewers don't subscribe to our weekly magazine. If you head over to cyclenews.com, I'll link it in the description below. We offer a free magazine every week. It offers a ton of free photos, specs, and a lot of other things that you won't see here on YouTube. So if you're into that stuff, head over to cyclenews.com and subscribe totally for free. Now, admittedly, I don't have a ton of time on the Sherco brand, and this was a really fun trip for me. I spent a little bit of time on a previous SE300 during a test we did a few years back against some of the other bikes in that similar lineup, like the Beta RR, the KTM XCW, the Husqvarna TX, and other bikes in that same range. I'll link that video up here if you guys want to check that out. But that's about the extent I have recently on the Sherco brand. If you're not familiar, they're a French brand that's really big in the trials world. Now, in the past few years, they've jumped into the Enduro scene full-fledged, and they really mean business. I personally felt that the last generation SE300 felt a little bit twitchy at high speeds. Now, granted, here on the West Coast, I'm spending a lot of time on the faster sand washes, wide open desert straightaways, a little bit less than I'm riding some of these mountainous single tracks where it's wet, sticky, slimy, things like that. The East Coast terrain is a far cry from what I'm riding over here. So just given that as my personal experience, that's where I'm coming from when I went to this test to ride the new Sherco model line. So on this trip, we got to ride all the new SE and SEF models. We had the 125 two-stroke, the 250 two-stroke, the 300 two-stroke, the 250 four-stroke, a 300 four-stroke, a 450 four-stroke, and a 500 four-stroke. It's a lot of new models to review in just a couple days of riding. Actually, one full day of riding. But for this video, I'm really gonna be focusing on the SE300. That's the bike that I spent the most time on and honestly had the most fun riding. Sherco also says this is their most popular seller of their Enduro lineup. So for 2025, the Sherco Enduro range is gonna get a whole host of improvements and updates. Now, across the board, all the new models are gonna receive these changes. We get new bodywork, a new airbox with an easily accessible air filter. You can just pop the side plate off here, get to the air filter, have easy access. It's very similar to something like the KTM. The real focus of the new models was to lose weight. So you're gonna have a new frame that's 250 grams lighter, which also has a new shock tower mount and a new steer tube. The subframe is new to match the shock tower and the regular frame, as well as focusing on easier access to the fuses and working with that new airbox design. The radiators have a 15% better cooling efficiency, and there's a new fan built in. The bikes also receive new triple clamps, which are lighter and have better bearing seals, and put the bars up 5 millimeters. You're gonna get closed cartridge KYB forks on these bikes. The four-stroke models come standard with a full Akrapovic exhaust system, and the two-strokes have a better ground clearance with a taller pipe. There's also a new swing arm, new front and rear wheels, and a new fall sensor, which actually kills the bike after 5 seconds of being tipped over on its side. The four-stroke models also receive a higher rev limiter. Another exciting part of the Sherco lineup is the addition of the racing models. Now, the factory models are gonna be what's ready to race straight out of the box, but the racing lineup will come in the 300 four-stroke and the 300 two-stroke. They're gonna offer a few less items that are bolted on straight from the factory, but you're still gonna get the racing decals and an open cartridge fork instead, as well as a lower price point. So yes, while this bike is all new, it's pretty much just a new frame and other components. The engine and stuff is pretty much the same as the previous generation. So if you're familiar with the Sherco engines, that's gonna be pretty similar to what it is still in the 2025 model range. All right, so after the presentation for the new bikes, and you can see the long list of updates, it's pretty clear who they're going after in this new updated range. That 3-letter agency or 3-letter group that's not too far from Sherco over there in France, you can tell that's who they have their targets on. With this new bike, you're gonna get a lot of updates that are geared towards the racing category. They're straight off the lot, ready to ride, ready to race. You can tell who they're going after. And for me, this was my first launch event with Sherco. And what that tells me, having all the media guys over there and having all the pressed to go over to France to go ride these bikes shows me that they're doing well, that they're putting more effort back into the market. And that's a good thing. The more brands we have in the industry, the better. And Sherco's definitely on par with some of the other bikes in the class right now. All right, earlier in the video, I had mentioned that riding the bike, the previous generation, I had noticed a little bit of twitchiness, and I didn't feel like it was as good at high speeds as some of maybe the other bikes in the class. But being over in France and seeing this bike in the real life conditions of where they test it, it really opened my eyes. I was like, wow, this is where they really test these bikes. And that's why I felt what I felt here in the open deserts. They just don't have those kinds of conditions over there. What we rode was a grass track and a pretty, fire roady GNCC-ish, Enduro-ish test that we got to ride. It was raining all morning, and as a West Coast guy riding a wet grass track, I felt like a fish out of water. I was sliding that thing around and just tiptoeing my way, watching some of the factory Sherco guys just absolutely fly by me. I was like, how are they riding the same course that I'm on right now? It was a big eye opener for sure. But the bikes worked really well. Out in the faster Enduro style course that we got to ride on, I felt a lot more at ease. I was actually really surprised at how rocky the terrain was. And when that stuff gets wet, oh my gosh, it was slippery. But riding the 300 two-stroke, I had an absolute blast. I spent most of my day on the 300 two-stroke and the 300 four-stroke just to get a little bit of range. Sherco says that both of these bikes are their best sellers. What I noticed on the 300 two-stroke, there's a map switch, so you can go aggressive or softer, smooth or aggressive. I felt a difference in this bike with the hit and with the carry as far as how high the revs went. I noticed that this bike had such good mid to top range. I'll put some of the riding video in here, but you can just hear this thing sing as you rev through the range there. That second, third gear, even fourth gear, some of the sections, man, it just had so much pull, so crisp. You're gonna get that with the carbureted engine and not a TBI or fuel injected bike like the KTM models. Now the KTM models, you're not gonna have to mess around with jetting or anything. It is something that is just a flaw of the carbureted design, but that snap, that initial roll on and the carry that it has through the mid is irreplaceable. I was super pumped to ride the 300 two-stroke and have that carb feeling. They had the bike working really good for us, obviously with these conditions, and it was just overall a blast to ride with that engine. The suspension for me felt really good. You have KYB forks on this bike and they worked really good for these kinds of conditions. Obviously it was really wet and sticky and slippery and all sorts of fun stuff for us to ride in. But I never noticed that the bike felt like it was bottoming or that it was, too springy or too stiff. It felt like it worked really good. The balance of the bike front to rear felt really good. You're gonna have Brembo clutch and Brembo brakes, which are obviously, to me, top of the line components. So the brakes worked really well in all the conditions. The clutch had, no fade or anything like that. It felt really solid. You can feather the clutch, especially on the 300 two-stroke, and really wake the bike up. But overall, just the feel, the fit, the finish of the Sherco bikes are totally top notch. I was super impressed with the overall package and just how the bike felt and how it worked when we were actually out riding the trails. Now, something I also want to touch on is just the overall ergonomics of the bike. The bike feels very skinny, which is good. It feels nice and slim, but the seat is actually pretty flat and wide. It kind of reminded me of how the Beta seat feels a little bit. It's a little bit wide on top, has that edge on the side, and with the flatness, there's not really a pocket for you to sit in, so good or bad, you can kind of hop to the front, you can kind of slide to the back, but on some of the other bikes, has more of that pocket where it really holds you in place. The Sherco is definitely a little bit flatter seat, flatter cockpit. The bar to seat to foot peg ratio all feels pretty good. I felt super comfortable on all these bikes right out of the gate, jumping back and forth, just adjusting levers and things like that, but overall, the ergos are comfy, and if you're somebody who likes to kind of move around on the bike, I think the Sherco is going to fit you pretty well. I also want to touch on the 300 four-stroke model. That bike was super fun to be riding. It's a little bit of a mix between a big bore 250 and like a 350, like a smaller 450. The 450 and 500 models were super fun and also a little bit much to be riding in the conditions that I personally felt. So the 300 four-stroke was something that I could really hold it on and have fun riding in these kind of slippery, wet conditions. You're not getting things like a quick shift or traction control or things like that on this bike, even though I totally could have used it out on the slippery conditions. But you are gonna get the aggressive and the smooth map switch. I personally felt like you're gonna notice it more on the four-stroke models than the two-stroke models. It really curves that hit or kind of ramps it up a little bit for the initial roll-on, and you're gonna get more of an aggressive feel out of the engine. But for me, the 300 four-stroke was so much fun. It was a little bit more than the 250 four-stroke, and a little bit less, obviously, than the 450. So these two bikes, I personally had the most fun on. You could really roll it on and have a lot of fun riding it. You can actually ride the bike to its potential, let it sing with the raised RPM rev limiter at 14,000 RPMs. This bike is not afraid to rev high, and that Akrapovic exhaust really sounds good when you open it up. Another thing that Sherco really wanted to reiterate is the fact that their bike comes ready to ride with a skid plate, with a radiator fan, with handguards. Those are some things that they have said that other brands that, like I said, that they're trying to go after, don't come with stock. So you're gonna be able to ride straight off the dealership floor and be able to hit the trails and have your bike be pretty solidly protected, rather than having to take a bike and then having to go outfit it with parts that are specific for trail riding or keeping your bike protected, like a skid plate, like handguards, things that are super common that you're gonna need. The Sherco bike comes with standard. So overall, my impression of the Sherco, I feel, has personally changed after going to the event in France and seeing what these bikes are really meant to do. Riding it out here in the faster conditions, it can still handle it, obviously. And if you see the video, we've obviously ridden in some faster third and fourth gear sections, and the bike felt totally planted and smooth. So I was really impressed with that. But seeing the types of conditions where they actually test these bikes shows you, wow, this is what it's really designed to do. So I think for guys who are riding the hard enduro, it's obviously proven with Mario Roman. He did really well at Erzberg this year, and seeing guys like Cooper Abbott and Cody Webb here in the US absolutely annihilating the hard enduro scene, it's obvious that this bike is proven in the conditions that it excels in. Once again, just seeing it in that type of riding and actually getting to experience it myself was a total eye-opener and a bunch of fun to ride in some conditions that I would never find here on the West Coast. So overall, when a bike comes standard with KYB suspension, Brembo brakes, and a Akrapovic exhaust, those are top tier components to come on a bike, and showing that straight off the floor with the Sherco 2025 model launch, it shows that this bike is ready to go and compete with some of the best bikes on the market. The SE 300 two-stroke and SEF 300 four-stroke were by far my favorite bikes of the day, but the whole lineup is updated for 2025 and offers a ton of new features for you guys to go test out on the trails. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap it up. 2025 Sherco 300 model launch. Bike was super fun and the conditions were equally as fun. Thanks everyone from Sherco for having us out. Now, if you guys haven't checked out our Cycle News magazine, head on over to cyclenews.com. We have a free digital magazine every week. You'll find photos, spec sheets, a full written review that maybe some things we didn't cover here in the video. We have more bike tests available online and other comparisons that you won't see anywhere else. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.